And I believe anybody who's in the waiting room right now is about to be let in or has been let in.
Okay.
Yep. Sam is giving me the thumbs up. So if you're out there, welcome. We're just going to hang out until the top of the hour. And our plan is to be done by 3 o'clock Mountain Time. Plenty of time to go fix a cup of tea. We won't start for 4 more minutes.
It's a tea kind of day.
It is here in Boulder. It is a tea, late afternoon coffee, rain, chilly. 2 feet of snow fell on Pikes Peak last night.
Wow.
Really?
Yeah.
So that means it's headed my way to ruin my beautiful spring.
Well, it's coming from your direction right now. We're full on coming from the east upslope type of event.
Ah, okay.
It'll make its way to you eventually, though, Derek.
We need some lounge hold music.
Yeah. See, I have a raised hand, Sam, but I don't know what to do with a raised hand right now.
Oh,
Yeah. Hey, Richard, I see that you have your hand up. What's on your mind? Well, we had him and we lost him. If you're just joining us, we're going to wait until the top of the hour to get things started. So just 2 more minutes and then I will start the webinar, and we do plan to be finished by 3 o'clock Mountain Time. Just 1 more minute, folks, and I will get us rolling. Thanks so much for everybody who's joining us right now. We're going to wait till the top of the hour to start the webinar.
oops.
Hello, everybody. I'm Mark with Leave No Trace, and we're ready to get this webinar started, although I think we need to get our executive director, Dana, back on the call. But that's okay. We have a minute or two before I'm going to hand things over to Dana Watts, executive director of Leave No Trace, and Derek Taff, our scientist with the organization, who's going to give the bulk of the presentation today. But before we do that, let me just welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really happy to have a good crowd for this special Leave No Trace webinar about the powerful role of science in our work. I wanted to give a couple notices up front. Oh, one thing that I wanted to cover is that we will not be using the Zoom chat function today. Instead, submit questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we will hold a Q&A portion toward the end of the main presentation. And again, we hope to have everything wrapped up by 3 o'clock. So we'll also be doing some pop-up quizzes during the session today. They're just for fun. You don't have to respond to those, but we'll flash those up from time to time just to give you another thing to focus on. But you won't need that because you're going to be enwrapped by our speakers. Dana Watts is the executive director of Leave No Trace, and Derek Taff is a longtime research partner and a faculty member at Penn State University. Dana is celebrating her 30th year guiding Leave No Trace this month, and she's been instrumental in advancing the integration of science into our work, especially over the last decade. Derek serves as the Assistant Dean for Research and Graduate Education. He is the Susie and Alan Martin Professor in the College of Health and Human Development at Penn State. He's also an Associate Professor of Recreation, Park, and Tourism Management. Derek has been researching Leave No Trace since 2009, and he recently served as the 2023 Visiting Scholar with Leave No Trace. His work focuses on developing communication strategies that promote both human well-being and environmental sustainability, particularly within parks and protected areas. So we're about to dive into some of the latest research that Leave No Trace is leading and what's on the horizon for the remainder of 2025. Final quick note, this session is being recorded, and Dana and Derek, please take it away.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. And welcome, everyone. Derek and I are delighted to be with you here today. The science behind Leave No Trace is not only fascinating, it's foundational. It shapes our strategies, strengthens our messaging, and ultimately increases our impact in the outdoors. Science is thought-provoking, and it's one of my favorite parts of Leave No Trace. It invites us to think more broadly and with curiosity. Our science searches for answers to specific behaviors, asking why people do the things that they do and how can we get people to do the things that help minimize impacts and protect the outdoors, nature. Science really today, science influences everything we do here at Leave No Trace. So over the next 45 minutes, Derek and I will explore the significance of science in Leave No Trace's mission and impact. We'll walk you through the priority studies we're currently working on and why they matter. And we'll answer your questions. Really, Derek will answer your questions about research and where it's headed. So let's start with the big picture. One of Leave No Trace's foundational core strategic pillars is science. And we believe that by investing in rigorous research, we gain critical insights into how recreation affects natural environments. These insights in turn guide the development of evidence-based practices, helping us reduce negative impacts and promote sustainable outdoor behavior at scale. There are many types of science that we're going to look at, categories that Derek will walk you through. Again, one of the most fascinating is behavior and human dimensions, and back to this notion of why people do the things in the outdoors that they do and how can we influence them to do the things that really make a difference and leave no trace. Derek will also walk us through our the Leave No Trace 5-year research agenda, and we'll see what is on tap right now currently. So Derek, let's hand it over to you.
Thanks, Dana. And thanks everyone for joining this afternoon or morning or wherever and whatever time zone you might be in. I'm just going to jump right in, and I want to, before we talk about this slide, circle back to something that Dana mentioned, which is what we'll focus on a lot today, which is human behavior. And I'll steal a quote from a professor I once had that said that human beings are the most difficult wildlife to manage. And I think that's 1,000% true. And that's really where a lot of our science is focused on, is human behavior and how we can leverage human behavior to align with largely protected area management objectives and sustainability objectives. Now, we couple that with a lot of use happening in our outdoor spaces. So that's really what this slide is about, is circling back to some research we did 4 to 5 years ago amidst the pandemic. I hate to bring everybody back to that sad frame of mind, but we saw a lot of new outdoor recreationists, and we did a national study. Leave No Trace facilitated a national study at that time, and we realized that around 20% of the US populace was now new to outdoor recreation. That then made it about 50% of the US populace participating regularly in outdoor recreation. That's a lot of us outdoors in these amazing spaces. That's wonderful from a lot of vantage points because we need these resources for our health and the benefits that we receive from these outdoor recreation spaces, our natural resources. However, we've got to balance that use, and that again circles back to the human behavior. This past year, data points suggest that since the pandemic, we've now grown about 4% more. So 54% of the US now regularly participates in outdoor recreation. If you're from another country, there are also some similar trends by and large globally as far as outdoor recreation. It's been on the rise. So even though we've been suggested that maybe those increases amidst the pandemic would have dipped, they haven't. They've still increased, and thus the importance of Leave No Trace more than ever. So turning to our science and how we understand and study and influence our um, our educational modules that we produce and our programming that we produce. There are 4 different types of science that I'll highlight that we focus on as an organization. The first is really where Leave No Trace began, the origins of Leave No Trace, which is largely the field of recreation ecology. And you can see this image of this book here by Dr. Jeff Marion, a recent retiree from the USGS and also faculty at Virginia Tech University. And Jeff Marion is really one of the leaders in recreation ecology globally and really did inform a lot of the efforts around what we currently know as Leave No Trace's principles. Recreation ecology looks at the impacts to the environment stemming from recreation behaviors, and there are always impacts. We just need to try and mitigate those, and that's where Leave No Trace comes in. And so this is measuring these impacts. Maybe it's tree carving, maybe it's trail widening, maybe it's denuded vegetation. And we can observe visitor behaviors this way, human behaviors, but we also can measure the ecological change stemming from recreation. The second type of science that we focus on is social science, and this is more my background. I'm a social scientist, and it's often termed the human dimension side, but this is our perceptions. This is what we know or don't know, how we feel about things, our attitudes, our beliefs, and most centrally, our behaviors. And ideally, in a perfect world of science, which not can't always happen outdoors in a non-laboratory setting, you want to pair recreation ecology with social science. We want to maybe have a Leave No Trace intervention and see how that potentially influenced, hopefully positively, the ecological systems. The third type is citizen science, which many of you, if you're participating in this webinar today, I have a feeling we might have some citizen scientists joining us. But this is voluntary, mostly voluntary visitors to spaces that literally are collecting data for land managers by and large. And Leave No Trace has an app for that. So this is perfect for long-term monitoring because as we know, staffing is generally short, right, in our protected areas. And so if we can help monitor conditions, and particularly over the long term, we can understand trends. And so citizen science is a really powerful tool. Finally, it's more internal with regard to program evaluation, and this can inform how we change or adapt our courses. This might look like constituent surveys, which I'll talk about here a bit later in this presentation. Our training evaluations, how well we educate folks at our spotlights and hotspot programs and our gold standard sites. This is more about the efficacy of our programming and how we can improve it constantly. And that's really where this slide comes in, which is how we use this science and why it matters. One, we know that we need to communicate what we understand. so we can hopefully improve our efficacy by and large, whether it's our training online, whether it's our training in the field. We want to improve efficacy and constantly evolve our programming based on empirical science. And finally, I'm very proud to be a part of this organization because we are advancing science. I recently did a bit of a background search on Leave No Trace specific articles that have been peer reviewed. So these aren't necessarily in public popular media, but peer reviewed journals. And there are around 170 peer reviewed journals focused on Leave No Trace efficacy currently. So we're advancing science. And with that, we've got a body of growing scientists. I can speak to my grad students here at Penn State who are completing dissertations all around Leave No Trace. So this is, again, continuing to grow and advance the science. So shifting gears a little bit, I'm just going to give a quick overview of roughly 15 years of what we know on our science and narrowing it down to kind of some easy facts for you that I'll circle back to as well. Through a lot of studies, and you can see some of the citations there, most of these are US based, but we understand that people believe Leave No Trace is easy to practice and they believe it's effective. They believe it reduces environmental impacts. And so when we talk about educating folks about specific behaviors, we really need to focus on that ease and how it's effective and circle back to those two features again and again. And the reason we need to circle back on those two features is because we can't just tell somebody and then they know to do something. We, in our science world, focus on theory, and we really apply theory to help us understand how to convey attitude change and behavior changing messages. Now, I would not normally show a slide of somebody smoking, but here, bear with me for a second. All right, here's why it's not just effective to tell somebody to do something, to educate someone without having some attitudinal and behavioral change influence happening as well. I would imagine that all of you as participants know that smoking is not good for you, okay? But there are still a lot of people that smoke because they have a positive attitude toward whatever feature they might get from smoking. Here's my more tangible example that's relevant to me. Okay, I know donuts are not good. I know donuts are not good for my waistline, but I really have a positive attitude toward the taste of donuts, right? So I eat donuts, right? So this is where our science really moves beyond just simply educating people. It's leveraging attitudes that then can leverage behavior change. And so it's not just about knowledge. Knowledge is important. That's the first step. But we also need to strive to change those attitudes to influence behavior. And then again, reinforce it's easy to practice Leave No Trace and it's effective. And that's really where the science also comes in, is understanding, is this easy? Do people perceive this behavior to be easy? Is it difficult? How can we decrease the difficult aspect? And efficacy, is it effective? Is what we're doing effective? And so that's what we're constantly measuring. So I'll give you a couple of recent examples about how we've informed practice with Leave No Trace. This is a bit of a pet peeve of mine, and it's social trails or undesignated or unmanaged trails. You might have heard it at all of those different titles, but these essentially are unmanaged by land managers, and they are prolific in many of our protected areas, and they can disturb wildlife, they can transmit invasive species. There's a number of managerial issues with undesignated or unmanaged trails. They can lead to more search and rescue issues because people aren't necessarily staying where mapped trails are. This particular study took place in Boulder Open Space and Mountain Parks, a great partnership of Leave No Trace. And we were simply testing, this is one of our earlier studies, testing messaging to see how messaging could influence behaviors. And the takeaway here is that through a really rigorous experimental design with a variety of signs and barriers and observing visitor behavior, we recognize that we can reduce undesignated trail usage by all the way down to about 3%. Only 3% of individual visitors going on undesignated trails. That's significant when you think about a space like Boulder Open Space that gets the equivalent of what Grand Teton gets, Grand Teton National Park gets in visitation. So again, this was an easy study where not easy to conduct, but easy takeaway in the sense that really it's effective. It's easy to put a leave no trace sign on a barrier and look at how effective it is. We're constantly hearing in the news about human wildlife negative interactions. And we're gearing up for a busy season upcoming in our parks and protected areas. Yellowstone is frequently featured as one of these spaces, and that's where all these images are of Yellowstone and negative wildlife interactions that have occurred. We recently conducted a study where we looked at leave no trace signage and some of that persuasive communication, where we focused on ease and we focused on the effectiveness. And essentially, we were able to mitigate the perceived distance that people felt safe and that they weren't impacting the wildlife. So our leave no trace messaging was 20% more effective at protecting wildlife than traditional park signage. The kind of, and I love what I do so much. The funny thing about this study was that we actually had cutouts of bison and elk, two of the most dangerous. Bison are the most dangerous animals in Yellowstone and the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. We had life-size cutouts, and we actually had people measuring distance of what they felt was safe for the wildlife, for themselves, based on our messaging. And you can see the image there of an elk. And it's funny, we're closing out the semester here at Penn State, and I was just in a storage closet gearing up for some of our field season, and I startled myself because I ran into the bison that was in the closet. So anyway, so disposing of waste properly. This is a big issue, particularly for parks and protected areas, is managing how much waste is produced in these spaces. For example, the National Park Service alone, there you see 70 million pounds of waste annually. And a lot of it is from our visitors, and it's what we're bringing into these spaces. It's what we're purchasing in these spaces from concessionaires. And over a 3-year span in Yosemite, Grand Teton, and Denali National Park, myself, several colleagues at Leave No Trace, and several graduate students studied this issue, and we ultimately crafted messaging that we found, for example, was 2 times more effective at encouraging proper sorting of recyclable materials at the bin. I'll share a little foreshadowing here, but we've got some upcoming studies that have evolved around this as well that we'll start conducting this summer. You see how simple these messages are. However, I'll also say that we studied this and exactly what should be on these bins, on these recycling bins and waste bins, with over 3,000 individuals responding to our surveys and over 8,000 individuals being observed at the bin and what they do at the bin with waste and recycling. So there is a great deal of science behind what would largely be perceived as quite a simple message, but again, doubles the effective behavior. We also look at specific behavior types. And if you were a climber, or perhaps you still are a climber, perhaps you're interested in bouldering as well. When we look at bouldering, it's really grown in popularity over the past 25-ish years. And you can really just look at the sheer number of climbing gyms and bouldering gyms that exist now compared to when, maybe there were a handful in the early 2000s. An epic location for bouldering is Rocky Mountain National Park. And in 2015, we had the opportunity to conduct a Leave No Trace focused study in Rocky about bouldering, because it was still a fairly new sport at that time in the big scheme of outdoor recreation, that is. And bouldering in Rocky, again, is a very Mecca-oriented place, to the extent where guidebooks were coming out around bouldering in Rocky that essentially came out in 2013, 2014, also leading to some of the bouldering behaviors in the park. So we first studied that in 2015, understood attitudes toward leave no trace and some specific behaviors relevant to bouldering, like perhaps leaving chalk on rocks, or perhaps clearing landing zones, removing vegetation and clearing landing zones for where boulders might fall. I had the opportunity in 2023 to be back in the park as a visiting scholar and redo this study. And that's a rare opportunity. And you can already tell from listening to me for the past 15 minutes, I'm quite a nerd on leave no trace science. It is a rarity that a scientist gets to go back to the same spot years later and measure potential influence or impact that has changed. And I'll just tell you, we saw significant change. There was significant attitude change. There was significant sheer understanding of leave no trace principles. And so we're talking about an 8-year difference. And I'm not completely causal in the sense of leave no trace did this. There's a lot of factors that have done this, including our partnerships that we made through this science. So Access Fund was involved. Leave No Trace became highly involved with Rocky Mountain National Park's Climbing Stewards program, where they actually sent volunteer climbers out into the field to educate folks about Leave No Trace. They also started a campaign in climbing gyms because we were understanding that a lot of boulders were actually learning in gyms versus learning outdoors. So if we could educate them about Leave No Trace in gyms, they would ideally practice Leave No Trace when bouldering outside. And we see this, and that was really exciting and confirming for me as far as the efficacy of Leave No Trace. So finally, one of my favorite studies, and I love talking about this one because I have a 10-year-old and she's very interested in Leave No Trace right now, and kind of at the point where she might be trying to educate me more than I'm educating her, which is interesting, intergenerational learning and a lot of potential for Leave No Trace with youth. But this took place actually at a storied environmental camp here in Pennsylvania, where I reside. And this is a camp that hosts fifth graders for 3 nights, 4 days at a time. And each week, a different school group comes in. And we were really interested in testing 2 things. One, we wanted to know whether Leave No Trace could influence nature connection for youth. And 2, we wanted to think about potentially, at least in our adult human mind, what might be the most difficult behavior to convey to a 5th grader with regard to Leave No Trace. And so we were really focused on leave what you find. And so as I describe this study, I want you to take yourself back to your 5th grade self and think about the most attractive objects that you might find in nature. And I've already demonstrated them for you because I've got them in the slide here. But we used pyrite, we used trilobites, fossils, and we used arrowheads. And essentially, we did at the beginning, when a school group would arrive, we would measure their attitudes toward Leave No Trace. Day 2, they would do something called a soils dig, and they would go through various layers of soil and potentially find these very attractive objects that we buried. And then we would document whether they took it, and then we would measure their attitudes at the end again. We also measured their relation to nature connection with regard to Leave No Trace. And over the span of an entire semester of kids coming into this camp, half the kids when they arrive got a very simple 15-minute lesson on Leave What You Find and Leave No Trace, and the other half did not. So we had to treat it in control group. And essentially the takeaway here is that we were able to significantly increase positive environmental attitudes, and we reduced take by about 11%. So kids still took the objects, but we reduced it by 11%. The big takeaway for me, however, was that the kids that were Leave No Trace trained or educated just for 15, 20 minutes had statistically significant more nature connection than those that never got a Leave No Trace lesson. The potential for this is great. And I list that 26 million youth campers just with American Camp Association to think about the potential impact of Leave No Trace training on future. All right. We've also moved beyond the backcountry. And so when we talk about the potential of Leave No Trace, it's not just in parks and protected areas. And we've started thinking a little bit more about something known as spillover behavior, which is where you might learn a given behavior in one context and then actually do it in another. And so through Leave No Trace, we measured a few different aspects of training and levels of Leave No Trace training. And the takeaway here is that not just even talking about our 7 principles, we're talking about general sustainable behaviors. In the next slide, I'll highlight this for you. Recycling, using alternative transportation, reducing our energy use. People who Leave No Trace practice environmentally sustainable behaviors as much as 2 times more than the general public. We had a complete general public sample and compared that with our Leave No Trace sample, 2 times more environmentally sustainable behaviors with Leave No Trace folks. We also know that the more you learn about Leave No Trace, so the higher levels of training that you obtain and Leave No Trace, the more likely you are to practice environmentally sustainable behavior. When we talk about how science can inform our efforts, this is a direct result that led to some of the messaging and educational campaigns beyond our parks and protected areas. So the Leave No Trace in daily life, you can see these sustainable practices. And we know that if we can continue to do this for folks, whether they learn at home with these sustainable behaviors and take it to a park, or maybe they learn in a park and take it home, we know that we're influencing folks at large to be more environmentally sustainable. Dana mentioned that we crafted a 5-year research agenda. While I had a big role in this, I also want to highlight that I was informed through a lot of help. The previous education director, Ben Lawhon with Leave No Trace, Jeff Marion, who was the recreation ecologist that I mentioned, Peter Newman, a colleague at the University of Vermont, Ashley D'Antonio, who's at Oregon State, all colleagues that helped inform this really great effort that's leading our way into science into the future. So we're a couple of years in. You see that was crafted in 2023, and we've made a lot of progress. If you want to check out the website, I've got the link there, and you can nerd out on Research Agenda with me. But these are the topical areas that we're really focused on. And this coincides with a new grant program that Leave No Trace began last year, and I'll circle back to that here in just a second as well. But we've got really important topics here. We need to still understand how to reach new outdoor recreationists. We know they're continuing to grow. I already mentioned the importance of pairing social and ecological science together. There's always barriers to compliance with specific behaviors, and we're trying to understand that. I already mentioned youth and nature connection. We still want to know more about general behaviors outside of parks and protected areas and how we can influence sustainable behaviors beyond there. I'd encourage you to check out the research agenda. Reach to me if you have any questions, but these are really areas we want to really focus on. We think this is of vast importance over the next couple of years. I'd also like to say that while I am really privileged to work with this amazing team at Leave No Trace, we've also been growing the team. So we've got over 30 scientists that are from a variety of disciplines. Folks that are leading ecologists, studying bats, moths, and the cascading effects of light pollution and sound, to folks like myself that study human behaviors. So we've also got a team that studies specific messaging effects and graphic design, but we've got a team of over 30 folks from a variety of institutions doing very rigorous work around this research agenda and beyond. And I'm really proud of them. So please check out that link there for the variety of scientists. And we're continuing to grow. So if you have interest in this, let us know. I did want to just highlight a couple of new studies that we've recently been working on. If you've ever encountered human waste in the outdoors, it's probably one of the most negatively impacting things that you will have encountered. And it's a growing issue. You know, we all use the bathroom, and I just shared 54% of us in the US go outside. And, you know, we've been studying this lately in a high mountain peak context as well as New Zealand with partners that are involved in Leave No Trace in New Zealand as well. And I'll just cut to the chase here. What we're largely finding, and I've shared in this slide 3 different studies that are of a variety of different contexts and user types. In Rocky Mountain National Park, we studied Long's Peak, so largely day users, a couple backpackers, and some climbers. Grand Teton largely was day users and some backpackers. And then Colorado 14ers at Mount Elbert, largely day users getting to that high mountain peak, that most popular peak, and back within about an 8-hour time period. Everybody had to use the bathroom in these visits, right? So where do you go and how do you go? And are you prepared? And what the big takeaway is that people are vastly underprepared. So when we talk about plan ahead and prepare, it's more important than ever, paired with dispose of waste properly. We're also finding that in some spaces, and these places are very high mountain peaks, often tundra, our cat holes and burying strategies are too difficult for folks. So when we think about that ease piece, they're not prepared, they don't think it's easy, so then they're not doing it. And so we've got to think about ways to change behaviors, change attitudes and behaviors with this. And we've also been working with companies to look at different pack out strategies. And that's another direction that we're looking at, because we realize that in different biomes and in different visiting types, different demographics of visitors, day users, backpackers, etc., we might need different strategies. And so this is an evolving piece that I'm really excited about, where we're informing aspects of dispose of waste properly, and keep looking out for more data points on this. No, yeah. So if I might have any audience members that are into watching stars, these quick screenshots demonstrate that this is evidently the new wave of tourism this year in 2025, focused on dark sky tourism. And you may have heard about parks and protected areas, or even communities becoming designated dark sky sanctuaries, dark sky parks, dark sky communities. Well, Leave No Trace is trying to understand this as well. And we've recently partnered with the National Park Service. They have a natural sounds night sky division that focuses on natural sounds, night skies. And we've been doing science in Acadia, Grand Teton, and upcoming in Great Smoky Mountain National Park, and looking at a variety of aspects with regard to light and how we can encourage people to reduce their lighting impacts. For example, a lot of folks we found don't realize how impactful light can be to wildlife. In fact, circling back to my initial quote, animals don't need light. We're the only animals that need light. And we often come back to aspects of safety as a reason for light. But more and more, we're understanding that the engineering behind light can also produce feelings of safety without producing those harmful lights to wildlife. And so amber light is what we're actually using more and more. And you may have a headlamp at home that has a red light setting. That is not only to protect your eyes and your campmates' eyes in the tent, but that's also to be less impactful on our wildlife as well. So through a number of studies, and I'll share an upcoming one here in just a second, we've crafted guidelines. So not only do you have the 7 principles, you've got the sustainable behavior in everyday life program and messaging there, but we've also got guidelines specific to our science as well. So feel free to check out the dark sky and artificial lighting guidelines that we've recently partnered with the National Park Service on. There's also a soundscape guideline as well based on science. Very proud to also say, I mentioned that there's roughly 170 empirical articles on Leave No Trace. At the summit this past October, we also had a research symposium that took place. And after that summit, we learned from a very popular journal in the academic field, the Journal of Interpretation Research, that they wanted to do a special issue on Leave No Trace. And so while we had about 13 research scientists presenting their science around Leave No Trace at the 30th summit, we were subsequently able to publish a journal article, a special issue in Journal of Interpretation Research. It is finals week here at Penn State, forgive me. And we were able to create this special issue focused on Leave No Trace. Again, just highlighting how Leave No Trace science is continuing to grow and continuing to provide evidence and potential changes in what we do. I mentioned our first research grant occurred last year. These are some of our 30 plus scientists on our team now, Dr. Yufei Lung and Lincoln Larson at NC State. But they recently conducted a study, and again, moving beyond backcountry, they focused on a very, very popular front country destination that was receiving a lot of impact, like social trails, litter, and whatnot. And they did some Leave No Trace signage and found that Leave No Trace was effective in these settings. So not just backcountry, but also front country. When people see signs, it's effective. And that's also in this special issue. I'll mention that this special issue is open access, which is a real sad thing in academia where we produce things and then it lives behind a paywall. It was very purposeful that this special issue in Leave No Trace is open access. And if you can't find it, email me and I'll send it to you. Some upcoming work as I'm going a little long here, and I'll speed it up. I'm so excited to announce that we have 2 new grantees for this year. One studying soundscapes and the efficacy of our new soundscape guidelines in Saguaro National Park. And I believe this study just wrapped up, so we should be getting these results soon with our partner, Dr. Lauren Ferguson. Lauren's at the University of New Hampshire. And then our other grantee this year, Jeremy Shellhorn out of University of Kansas and Will Rice out of University of Montana. And they're looking at signage specifically. Jeremy's a graphic designer, a professor of graphic design. Will's a park and protected area professor like myself. And they're looking at fragile tundra environments and how they can influence staying on designated trail and durable surfaces. This is going to be really exciting. They're doing some of the best signage work I'm aware of, and they are, of course, Leave No Trace scientists. They're also starting to work with Washington State Parks, and JD Tanner, the education director at Leave No Trace, worked with them to recently craft these campground reservation ethics. In short, imagine if you've ever been to a campground and it's one of those that you wait on recreation.gov 6 months in advance so you can make sure you get your special spot that you've been going to with your family for the past 20 years. But then you show up and all the other campsites around you are vacant, even though you got what seemed to be the last one, right? This is an effort to help people think ethically about their campground reservations, right? Don't book more days than you need. Don't book more sites than you need. Really, we want to think about access and equity with regard to this. And this is something we'll be studying, or Jeremy and Will be studying in tandem with Leave No Trace. I'm really excited. This next week, I've got my grad students headed to Yellowstone to pick up some pieces from that initial signage study where I mentioned the cutout bison and whatnot. We're moving forward with understanding guiding, so commercial use authorized guides in the park, and general visitors, and how we can influence their behaviors with regard to Leave No Trace. This is happening in the Serengeti of the US, the Lamar Valley, which is very well known for wolf viewing. This is a really tough place to do social science and pairing it with ecological science. And we're really excited about the outcomes of this to help us inform respecting wildlife and the various behavioral aspects of that. I already mentioned that we're doing some more messaging around waste and recycling, and we will be at the National Mall doing this summer, as well as Mount Rushmore. So 2 very different park units. And I put some research messaging examples here, and I put this to sort of make fun of myself a bit, but I also wanted to note how important science is and why we test things so rigorously. This was a sample of about 200 people, and I crafted 13 messages to find out, and this is for Rushmore, what might be the most effective messaging aspect? What would be most influential to make people do the right thing and recycle? And you can see the one that I thought was going to rise to the top, the presidents, this is Rushmore. The presidents are watching how you behave in this special place. Please sort your trash and recyclable materials. As the scientists in the room, that was the lowest ranking item, even though I thought it was going to be the top. The importance of this is don't just throw out what you think is going to work. This is what Leave No Trace does. We test it. We test it before it's implemented. And we're also, this next week, I'll be in Great Smoky Mountains working on some more lighting projects. We're partnering with some ecologists, Dr. Jesse Barber out of Boise State and his PhD students, and we're measuring how light influences both ecological well-being as well as camper behavior. And we're doing this in bathrooms, which is exciting because bathrooms are one of the most impactful sources of light in our parks and protected areas, but it's also the easiest to change. Tomorrow, but for you special attendees today, we are launching a study about summer behaviors because, as you may have heard, some land managing agencies, particularly federal agencies, are experiencing budget cuts and some staffing reductions. And so we, trying to inform land management about possible trends, are trying to get an understanding of this. Are people concerned about some of these staff reductions? Might they be changing their anticipated summer behavior? Maybe they won't go to federal parks, like national parks. Maybe they'll go to state parks. We're starting to understand this so we can help inform management and prepare them for a busy summer season. So I've got the QR code there. Feel free to take this now, or you'll probably receive it through the Leave No Trace Outsider as of tomorrow. Okay, I've gone a little long-winded. As you can tell, I've already mentioned I'm a Leave No Trace nerd, and we'll talk all day about Leave No Trace science. But I just want to highlight how important it is. And the fact that you're attending this, you care, right? You care, and it's so important to facilitate the science that actually is effective at protecting our resources and our visitor experiences. So with that, I'll be quiet and turn it back over to questions. Dana, Mark.
Yeah, I'll lead us through some questions, and you guys probably hopefully all saw the polls that we have a couple more of those, but let's get into some questions. And thanks for bearing with us. Just to reiterate, we do plan on being done at the top of the hour. If you need to go, totally understandable. We thank everybody for their participation today, but let's spend a few minutes now with some questions for both Dana and Derek. And Dana, I'm going to lead off the questions with just wondering, what's your favorite research project that we've done or engaged in now? If you had to pick one.
It's such a great question, such a hard question. I would say, well, I'll talk to maybe one of my favorites, and then one that I'm finding really interesting. One of the favorites is when we looked at this notion of environmentally responsible behaviors. And it came to us because when we talk about people who are trained in Leave No Trace, we know when a person is educated in Leave No Trace, they are 5 times more likely to protect nature. And so the question was, well, if they are trained in Leave No Trace and protecting nature, I don't believe they're just coming home and not applying that ethic to their home environment and practicing these environmentally responsible behaviors too. So that was really what we were at. That was the question we were asking and the theory that we were testing. And so, yes, in fact, we did find that spillover effect was happening. And so when people have embraced the Leave No Trace ethic in the outdoors, minimizing their impacts in nature, they are applying those same kinds of that ethic to their home environment and practicing recycling and all of these different environmentally responsible behaviors that have a huge impact to our Mother Earth. So far greater than what we're just doing on a trail or in a park, but really how we're responding to the much bigger effort of protecting Mother Earth and climate and all those things that are wrapped up in that. So I loved that study, and I felt like it was really compelling and relevant and so important to express in our work. So that was one. And then quickly, one other that we've been looking at recently is we've had a partner come to us and say, I've got this product that is for waste and waste disposal in high alpine environments. And it's a new formula that's made with mushrooms, and it's meant to compost human waste in high alpine, very sensitive, pristine environments. And so we thought, okay, that's interesting. Let's look at this, because does it in fact work? Does it break down and compost? But more importantly, are we potentially, or are they potentially introducing a new, possibly invasive substance to these environments through this mushroom formula? So that's something that we started looking at last year on, I believe it was 15,000-foot peaks. And honestly, I believe that the research, the data is not conclusive. And Derek, I'm going to ask you, because that was a really fascinating one to me. And I actually saw the product on the shelves in an outdoor retailer. So it's out there, but it's one that we're really interested in understanding more about for us to really participate and potentially use that as a product.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really interesting one. And the partners at that organization are really keen on providing science, evidence-based application for their products. And so they're not only providing trowels and the mycelia burial systems that ideally break down waste a little bit faster. They're also moving into more of a waste bag carryout strategy as well, that also has some of them have a breakdown strategy. We don't know exactly how it affects different biomes. What we do know is that mycelia exist in all biomes, some different types in different spaces. They don't know how long-term or what it might change in the environment. It's a really creative idea, and it could very well be beneficial in some spaces. And we've really just got to think about what it could do potentially as a trade-off. But it's really interesting. And it's exciting to hear that outdoor industry, in my opinion, how outdoor industry is embracing some of these behavioral practices to be more sustainable.
Excellent. Thank both of you. Let's do a couple more quick questions, and I have one more poll for the audience. Thank you guys for filling in those poll questions. Derek, a Leave No Trace educator asked, could you give an example of how our research has changed the curriculum that we offer to the public?
Mm. Yeah, I think we're constantly evolving. I know some of our online training, for example, I'll call out recent PhD graduate and our education director, JD Tanner, has developed a lot of new modules online to make Leave No Trace training more accessible, simpler, shorter, more accessible, and a gateway into Leave No Trace training. And to continue training in that way. And he's seen effects. His dissertation, in fact, was around Leave No Trace 101, the new online course, and its effectiveness. And so that's a very tangible, easy example. Another one might be that youth study that I mentioned, right? I would say that Leave No Trace was not in the education market of increasing nature connectedness. Was it a potential byproduct? Yes, certainly it was. But now Leave No Trace education can be in that space, right? We can actually facilitate nature connection for kids through our Leave No Trace educational modules. So those are two simple examples. I can go on and on because I love Leave No Trace science so much, but more questions, Mark.
Yeah, several people have asked, and either one of you or both can tackle this. How have recent changes in federal funding affected Leave No Trace science and research? Dana, you want to start us on that?
Yeah, absolutely. The effects of the federal funding, and I wouldn't say cuts necessarily, they are affecting our programming without a doubt. And we have some grant programs with the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management that have essentially been put on hold. We're hopeful that those might be restored. But we also are thankfully moving forward on a couple of projects that Derek has mentioned with funding from the National Park Foundation to do work with the national parks. One was the Mount Rushmore project that Derek mentioned, and the other is the National Mall. That's not to say that they haven't had been affected by what's going on right now in terms of logistics and delays, but we're very hopeful that those projects that are largely underway will run their course and we will be able to do those studies. We're keeping a very close eye on all that's happening, which, as I think everyone would agree, is a moving target and changing rapidly. And we're hopeful that things will settle down and federal funding will continue to come to Leave No Trace. It's not a huge portion of our budget. However, it is a critical part of our budget in that it does help us continue with this research priority.
Great. Last question, and then I want to make sure we get people out of here on time. So this is a good one and a hard one, I think. How can we measure the efficacy of our programs in our own recreation areas? How can we participate in research projects that might be coming up? Derek, you want to kick us off on that one?
Yeah, that was research in our home areas.
Yeah, if you are involved in a recreation area that's local to you, are there any tips we have on measuring the efficacy of, I assume we mean Leave No Trace programs in our local recreation areas?
Yeah, I mean, two easy ways in my mind are to volunteer. And our protected areas likely need volunteers more than ever, potentially with staff reductions stemming from the previous question. And so volunteer and also citizen science, which is one of the four science types that I mentioned, is a great way. And Leave No Trace app exists and you can download that very easily. And I know Mark can get you in touch with that link if needed, but that's a great way as well. Again, staffing and helping with regard to understanding what's happening in these spaces, that could be very lucrative and helpful for you to be involved in. There may be ongoing science depending on the protected area. For example, like a Boulder open space in mountain parks has their own social science and ecology team, and you could get in touch with them. If it's a smaller, like my local Center County Park and Recreation facility, they don't necessarily have social scientists, but they do partner with us on campus to help facilitate science. So I think it's just doing a little looking around. If you have any issues and you're not reaching the right sources, I'd be happy to look into it for you. So send me an email. But first and foremost, volunteer and consider citizen science approaches as well.
Yeah, and if you don't have Derek's email handy, you can always write to info@lnt.org, and we're going to forward that. Oh, well, there it is right there. Okay, you've answered that. One last question, and then I will let everybody get on with their days. But David asks, are you aware of any longitudinal studies about behavior changes associated with hearing Leave No Trace messages over time? So does longitudinally, can you demonstrate that over time people change their behaviors when they hear about Leave No Trace?
That's a really good question. I'm aware of one study. I believe this person is still the superintendent at a national park unit, but did their dissertation on Leave No Trace science and looked at a concept called diffusion of innovation, and it's how we adopt things over time. I would guess that we have evolved a bit. And some of the reason I would suggest that this has been effective and positively influenced people over time is that any of the work we've done in more of the backcountry, I often call it, we're preaching to the choir now. A lot of our backcountry visitors know Leave No Trace, and they're doing it well in most senses. Now, sometimes we have so much use that we can't accommodate all the people doing outdoor recreation in those spaces. But that's why a lot of the shift has been to more of everyday behaviors at home, sustainable behaviors, and front country settings and parks like that as well. Because I really do think a lot of people that have been participating in outdoor recreation for a long time are well aware of Leave No Trace. And for example, the science that I've done recently in the front country, people are aware of the phrase. They may not be completely aware of the organization, which is room for us to grow, but they're aware of the phrase, which has a lot to say about our influence and impact already.
Great. Well, everybody here today has learned a little more about Leave No Trace and our research, and we're really grateful for your attention. We're excited about things to come, including a new study that we'll be launching in our newsletter. The Outsider tomorrow is going to officially launch a new study that Derek is conducting. And we are very eager to hear from everyone about your plans for summer recreation and what you may or have adjusted in your plans as you learn about parks and protected areas dealing with things like budget reductions and staff decreases. We would love to be able to provide decision makers and land managers with scientifically valid survey information about the summer outdoor recreation scene, how that's shaping up, and that launches tomorrow and concludes on May 19th. Anything else people need to know about that, Derek?
No, much appreciated, Mark. That was great. And I'll just go back to that slide.
Yeah, and we'll thank our Dana and Derek for leading us through this discussion, and we're going to wrap up just a minute or two early, but really appreciate everybody tuning in today, and we look forward to doing this again soon. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks, Dana.
Yeah, thank you, Derek. Thank you, Mark. And thank you to all for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time and the support. And we really enjoyed giving you this insider view on all that research has to offer Leave No Trace and vice versa, and powering what we all do together to protect the outdoors. Keep an eye on your inbox in the coming days. We will send you a link of the recording at this actual session if it was missed. And we're excited to offer these behind the scene roundtables. So look for more in the future. And thanks again for being part of the Leave No Trace community, supporting our commitment to science-based stewardship. Derek, thanks for taking the time. Mark, thank you too. And everyone have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks.